My name is Jonathan Ryder, and I'm the director here at the Flag Art Foundation. Thank you all for coming out tonight to hear a conversation between Louis Fratino and Robert Glück. I'm going to do their bios first, and then a little boilerplate, and then Robert's going to do a special reading of his piece for tonight. So, all right. Louis Fratino is an artist living and working in Brooklyn. Fratino received his BFA from the Maryland Institute College of Art in 2015. His first solo exhibition, Louis Fratino Satura, is currently on view at the Centre per l'Arte Contemporanee, Luigi Pecci in Prato, Italy, through May 11, 2025. Other recent solo exhibitions include In Bed and Abroad at Sigma Molloy Jenkins, New York in 2023, Louis Fratino Lithography Bulla in Rome in 2023, and Die Buiten Tage at Galeria Neu in Berlin. Fratino was also featured in the 60th International Art Exhibition of the Venice Biennial. The title of the exhibition was Foreigners Everywhere, curated by Adriano Pedrosa. Fratino's work is in the collections of the Baltimore Museum of Art, the Hammer Museum, the Museum of Contemporary Art in San Diego, MFA Houston, RISD Museum, and the Whitney, among others. Fratino was the recipient, of the Fulbright Research Fellowship in Painting in 2015, and the Yale Norfolk Painting Fellowship in Norfolk in 2014. The legs are just going. Robert Glück, thank you for joining us tonight. Is a poet, fiction writer, editor, and new narrative theorist, and is emeritus professor of San Francisco State University. He was the director of San Francisco State University's Poetry Center and co-director of Small Press Traffic Literary Center. In addition, Glück worked as associate editor of Lapis Press. He's the recipient of the California Arts Council Fellowship in 2002 and the San Francisco Arts Commission Cultural Equity Grant in 2003. He's the author of the story collections Elements, Denny Smith, and the novels Jack the Modernist, which will be republished in 2025 by New York Review of Books. Lou's spotlight presentation is our 22nd, and from the get, pairing artists and writers has always been core to the program. We also have two former spotlight artists, Elise Nessenbaum and Maria Barrio, in the audience tonight, so thanks for coming. And also in my tenure at Flag, this is also the third exhibition that we feature Lou in an exhibition, so thank you for participating. And Robert, this is the first time we've worked together, and hopefully there will be more again. Before I turn this over to Robert to read his piece, The Purple Men 2025, just a few housekeeping items. The exhibition that you're sitting in right now is Lubaina Himid, Make, Do, and Mend. This is co-presented by the Contemporary Austin and runs through next Saturday. Next Wednesday night, we'll be hosting a roundtable conversation with Lubaina, David Breslin, and Christina McKnight, and we'll also launch the book that accompanies the show. Then on Thursday, February 27th, Flag will open our next exhibition titled A Rose Is, which is a sprawling group show that centers on a 25-foot-long Cy Twombly that hasn't been publicly seen in about 25 years. And also opening that evening is the first spotlight program of the spring season, which will feature a new painting by Ellen Altfest and a text by Julian Demerick, an art historian and curator of the Royal Academy of Arts in London. That will be followed by spotlights by Jesse Mockran and Peter Halley. Now that that's over, let me turn this over to Robert Glück, and thank you both again for coming.
How does this sound? It feels a bit over-mic'd.
Yes. Yes.
Could you kind of bring it down? I feel like impending. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. This piece is called Purple Men 2025. And I used writing about this wonderful painting to revisit a series that I'd written the first in the late 80s, I think, and the next was in the early 2000s, called The Purple Men. One is The Purple Men and one is The Purple Men 2000. And they're kind of my dear puppets. A little bit generic gay men and studying their household and their ways. They have a kind of immortality, I think, since the vernacular does. and I see them as instances of the vernacular, queer vernacular. Okay. It's the weekend. Trent blasts Norman fucking Rockwell again and again till Daryl asks for quiet. After great sex, he and Daryl drift into their private thoughts. Listen, one way from Daryl and another from Trent. Trent. We occur in the ephemeral, but now the ephemeral also lasts like a post on Instagram. Of course we have aged, but not as flesh and blood, more like a saying that dropped out of the vernacular, like it ain't over till the fat lady sings. Daryl. 20 minutes ago, we were the joyous center of a war-torn world. Trent's intricate lower back and the soft flesh of his ass gave me pangs of tender lust. We beheld each other in solemn awe in the temple of our rumpled bed. Here is excess. Here is overflow. Some dam broke, a gush of saliva. It's great to be homosexual in this context. Then inner necessity dissolved, leaving a puzzle. There was a cock, and that cock wanted to be inside. There was a hole, and that hole was urgent to be filled. I suppose Trent is the temple prostitute, meaning no disrespect. He's the kind of disciple who satisfies everyone. Trent. It's an unusual morning. If there's going to be dissatisfaction, it's usually on Daryl's side, the side of mixed emotions. He was inside of me 20 minutes ago. Daylight gave our story a gutsy plausibility. Now he's transported by a blue light, an oracle that blathers depressing riddles about the future. Now Daryl is exaggerated and blurred. The beam penetrates our bedroom like an alien invader who teaches a phony lesson while launching an obliterating attack. Our sex was not obscure. It was clear, as though I climbed into an app named Trent. I'm united with event. Why doesn't Daryl scroll through Grindr or Sniffies like a normal man? Instead, he suffers the shocks and breaking news of the Drudge Report, TikTok, or tries to. Daryl has some anger management issues. Fuck you, Siri. This internet room is vast because I experience a lot of loss. Trent. When Daryl is not outraged by the crimes of the commodity, he's shopping for a cheese grater with the best reviews. Listen, the liquid trill of an oriole, as though our story turns inside its call. A moment to consider, should I masturbate to expel the tension? Daryl. I climb to the top of my anger as though it's a mountain peak. Listen, a horn blares, froths, clatters, clanks, bumps, slops. When I was younger, I daydreamed that I vanquished our enemies with the weapon of language. I was accuracy. I described their crimes so exactly that they couldn't breathe. My voice, rising, combated injustice and clarion disdain. Dictators cringed and acknowledged and succumbed with a cry of recognition. Their guilt, suddenly visible, dragged them into darkness. Now language falls away, irrelevant, while words carried too much power. I am just as likely to dispatch my target with a sniper's bullet. What changed in my dreams and in my culture? Trent. All this turmoil is a distraction from what? On the one hand, language doesn't matter. On the other hand, words have too much power. Should I text Ray, a man who speaks to me? Sucking Ray's cock, so bitter it scalded a star on my tongue, but also somehow opened the whole sky. Speaks to me is an odd expression to describe encounters with so little talking. But sex is a language, right? Ray is the third corner of their throuple, a little top who smells like a new car and walks on his toes even though he's wearing sneakers. He is a smaller, younger version of Daryl. Daryl met him when he walked in on Ray and Trent. Daryl was embarrassed. Ray's nakedness was at least partly clothed in Trent's ass. Trent was laughing, but is anal ever lighthearted? What would Colette say? Opening your ass is a psychic expense, right? Trent wants to be fragrant. He farts. The smell reaches Daryl, who says ow as though he was punched. Trent, am I different? It's not just cyber sex, but also compulsive information searches like everyone else. The screen gives reality to our musty sheets littered with brass weapons. Every Saturday morning at 10:30, my phone tallies my weekly hours as though to shame me. But I am also faithful. I search for men who resemble Daryl. Flesh and blood distract me. Hardly a distraction. What can distract from flesh and blood? Oh, maybe parties where drugs addle our flesh. Trent reads Daryl's mind without trying. Still, it startles him when Daryl cries. The only way for the world to regain its sanity is to tax the rich. Trent, everything seems inconsequential, but I don't have a problem with that. My nipples feel quiet. And the serious navel orange with its dry membrane and penetrating flavor and deep sparkle. Daryl, is the temple of intimacy ever private? A temple is a public space. Trent, somehow we are wasting good suffering. What do I mean by that? Daryl, how can we live in a home that works, a home that is tender in a minimal voice, a home that is home and the recreation of home, where we cross a line we want to cross, the blur of me and not me, where we cook my mother's stew, fuck, clean our bodies, watch TV and sleep, the fortress of our queer soul, where the fridge fills and the trash empties, where we endure what we can't survive and what we choose to suffer. This is home, sweet musty sheets. This is home, fabric, wood, gas, lath and plaster, bricks, concrete, stainless steel, paper, glass, and clay. Listen, the fat lady is singing. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you. I want to start this off by saying that from the get, I think pairing artists and writers has really been the core of this program. And I think for each of these presentations, we've really been kind of surprised and enamored, and I think they're really kismet pairings at the end of the day. So thank you both for participating in this and for being here as well tonight. I kind of want to start this off by asking you both how and when you were both aware of each other's work first. And then also once the invitation was extended, what those first conversations were like.
Yeah, I didn't know Bob personally at first. I just knew his work. So I read Marjorie Kemp first and Jack the Modernist. My friend Jordan Weitzman introduced me to his work, and I just felt a real admiration for it. So I also just want to say thank you for writing such a beautiful and moving thing to go alongside my work, which I can only hope accomplishes such, I don't know, emotion, and I'm really, really pleased to be a part of this too. And yeah, it was, I think, a kind of kinship that I felt with Bob's work about representing sex within a life that's lived, and also within a context of history. I think in reading Marjorie Kemp, that was the first thing that really struck me, was that these kind of images were not kind of belonging just to a contemporary queer experience, but all of time or all of humanity, and that was really meaningful, and one of the first times I ever encountered that, I think, in contemporary literature. So yeah, that was exciting for me. And then hearing from Jordan that you were even aware of my work gave me the audacity to ask you to consider doing this, and you incredibly said yes, so that's what happened.
Well, on my side, I saw work that I thought was Louis's, and then I went online to look for it because I felt a real kinship with it. And when I really started looking online and seeing this work, my thought was, here is somebody, if Jack the Modernist ever gets republished, here is a person that I want on the cover to do the cover image. So I had this thought, and then at the same time, Jordan had contacted me about possibly doing a book with him, which turned out to be Jack the Modernist, but at the same time, New York Review of Books asked to do it, and they have been doing my books, so they're the ones who got it. And so suddenly all this fell into place, and then came this invitation to get to know, really, I see this as a way of getting to know Louis, and yeah, that's amazing. And what I recognized is something that I felt a kinship with, which is a kind of exploration of queer domesticity and queer intimacy.
And I think that's a good jumping off point. I think it's the invitation for Louis and your invitation were staggered by probably maybe 2 months.
Yes.
And the idea that the painting was started in the studio before a story was kind of conjured. I'm also interested in a more like structuralist approach, how you both attacked or thought about each one of the projects.
Sorry. I've always been tempted to pick up the phone during an event, but I'm not going to do it.
Go for it. Yeah, I think we maybe approach like our relationship with historical artwork or historical literature similarly, that I mean, just the title, Jack the Modernist, was so exciting to me, that there was this kind of sexy book also about history, or about just thinking about modernism in a sexy way instead of a kind of dusty, kind of straight male kind of way, was also something I feel like I'm grappling with in my work all the time. And so this work that I made comes from a Beckman painting, and I feel like maybe, Bob, you can talk more about this in your relationship, but also using Marjorie Kemp as something to dive into your own experience is kind of a similar way of just starting to work.
Right. Well, so did you hear that? It's a Max Beckman painting called City of Brass. And a lot of the imagery, or some of the imagery that I used, comes from that painting. So shall I describe it, or do you want
to? I mean, I can jump it. I can talk about why. I mean, I love Beckman's work in a way that kind of remains mysterious for me too. I find it beautiful. I
love it too.
Yeah, there's an intensity to it, and I think I was interested in trying to make an image about also queer conflict, and I think that's something that happens in your work too. In Jack the Modernist, there's really beautiful passages about communion, about touch, but then there's also a lot about jealousy and insecurity, and I feel like that's something that's not that well represented, especially not in the visual arts, that you would see that kind of intimacy in a queer relationship where maybe it's failing to work out even. And I feel like in recent years, there's been really fortunately this support of like celebrating queer intimacy, but maybe not digging deeper. And I think that that was part of my interest in using Beckman, which is about the way that people are struggling to relate to each other, which is what this painting is about also for me, you know, which does happen within the home too.
But also like visually and within the state of the narrative, I think, you know, looking at the painting, which maybe half of you can see and hopefully you can actually, after you move through the space, but I think it immediately presents itself as this beautiful kind of image where there's an imminence of sex in the room. Either it's just happened, about to happen, or about to happen again. But you have two bodies that are touching each other, which are also couldn't necessarily be more farther apart at the same time. Someone's lost on their phone, and the figure at the bottom is kind of staring out in this way that it's really hard to read the emotional state. I think with almost like no pupil in the eye, it's just kind of this black that's looking out. And I think that complicated space really goes into Robert's story, where essentially you can be in the same relationship and maybe not know what's going on in someone else's head. So there's also kind of even though there's maybe a physical breakdown between the walls between them, there's still a wall up in terms of you never really know what's going on with someone else at the time. So I think the beauty of the story is it kind of captures that, you know, from the quotidian to online shopping to reading the news to wondering what just happened to kind of the metaphysical thoughts. I think it's all about the body, and I think the painting really does that as well.
I think that's one of the things I love to do is to record. It's really a kind of realism, I suppose, but it looks like a fragmentation because you're just recording these things that flow through people's heads, even inside of sex. When I say sex is a language, I mean it, but it conveys all kinds of things during its action. And yeah, I think about queer domesticity as something that's been on my mind since the beginning, and I was thinking today about why that is. I think it's because certainly when I was young, but I think that's always still true, is that the world is not entirely safe. It was quite unsafe when I was young. The homosexuality was basically a crime or a disease, and violence against gay people was normal. And so I think people really wanted to make a place where they belonged, since they just didn't belong, since we didn't belong in the world. People wanted to construct a place where they belonged, and that was a safe place. And I think that's the beginning of the impulse to construct safe domestic spaces. So it's actually a political beginning, and probably remains that.
Yeah, I think a lot of painting comes from painting what you want to see. And I think painting has this ability to also alter the way you relate to the things that are happening to you in your life. And I think it functions like that for me too, where I love the last paragraph in your text where it's about the kind of, reality of constructing a space. You talk about the materials and things like that. And I feel like similarly with painting, part of building a relationship or building even security in a city for me is representing it over and over again to myself and kind of fostering a relationship to it through painting that can be positive because it's painted in a certain way maybe.
But also I like the idea that like creating a home or a safe space is not inherently an end unto itself. That like it is one step, but then also like brings a whole other host of complications.
Yes, of course.
So that it's not a destination, but that's actually kind of a jumping off point for then a whole series of other complexities of just human relationships.
Yes, yes indeed.
I think talking about Beckman is also an interesting way to kind of talk about reference in general, and the idea that I feel like reference can talk about being also part of a tradition, specific either painting or writing. I would say, like, I would be interested to know both about both artistic references, past and present, things that you're excited about now, and maybe things that you rethink about now.
Yeah, I mean, hearing the word tradition just got me thinking about something I love so much about Bob's work, that I feel like that's parallel to talking about having a home, where it's like being queer in the world, you don't always feel like there's space for you, but also you don't always feel like there's space for you in history. And I feel like you have to kind of invent it, and so it's kind of simultaneously finding this tradition that does exist, but making it at the same time. And I feel like that's something that your work does through your engagement with history and through claiming modernism or something like that. And so that was so inspiring for me. But I think that's what drives a lot of my relationship to being really open about what my references are, that there's iconic modernism, there's Max Beckmann, there's Picasso, there's Matisse, because it's about making maybe room for myself and painters like me that weren't afforded that space, and that we have this point in history where we have to do that.
It's funny, I like a quick aside, I studied Egyptology before contemporary art, and one of the oldest texts in the world is called the Pyramid Texts, and there's a beautiful hymn, it's called Utterance 273, which is called the Cannibal Hymn. And it's all about how you eat your ancestors, you eat your predecessors, and you kind of make something new out of it. So I kind of like that idea that it's living history at the same time, and it's also a way to kind of think about how to make things modern. And talk about reference in your work.
Well, I think I just pillage. Jack the Modernist, the name is a reference to Jacques Le Fataliste, the Diderot book, which is a delightful book. And I was making an allegory, really, between modernism and postmodernism, but bringing all these qualities listed by Venturi and other people who were promoting postmodernism into a relationship, like an intimate relationship rather than a historical relationship. So that was my game in that book. I guess I've always been kind of a literature and art. I mean, it's kind of where I live, and so when I meet somebody in history that I feel compelled by, it may not be for historical reasons, but that they allow me to express something that I couldn't do otherwise.
Yeah, I love that you say when you meet them, because that's really how it feels when you're an artist, that the work is so alive that it's like a real physical dialogue. And I feel like for queer artists specifically who have this kind of sideline history, for me it feels like there's almost this necessity to manifest something sort of physical in almost a mystic way to relate to it, to connect to it. And so I also feel that way, that I meet these figures throughout history when I read something or see something, that it feels like they're there, kind of. And that there's something about, I think, being a queer person that necessitates that.
Sort of by the same token, I want to put that on the page as a kind of performance, which is impossible, but I want it. And most goals in writing are impossible anyway, like clarity. And I want the reader to feel as they're implicated in this performance. And I think that's true of your paintings as well.
Well, thank you. I hope so. Yeah, I feel like it's about making something so well that the person recognizes it, even if they've never experienced it before. And that's the thing that happens to me when I see great work throughout history or read something so beautifully written as you've done, that maybe I've never been in those spaces, or maybe I'm not Daryl, but I care all of a sudden because of really the beauty of it. I feel like the beauty of the language, or the beauty of Mark, or something like that.
Well, let me ask a question.
Sure.
So when you paint, do you imagine an audience?
I think that I try my hardest not to, but I would be lying to say that I don't. I think that my ideal audience would be those historical figures that I engage with, probably. But I am, of course, also thinking about the work that I've already made and what's been seen and trying to push against that or enrich it or make it more complicated. And so I would say that I am aware of a contemporary audience, even though I would like to imagine myself, like, Guston says, that, the art world's in your studio and then history's in your studio, and then if you're lucky, you leave the studio, which is a beautiful thought, but I think happens.
Would you say it again?
Yeah, I'm going to butcher the quote, but it's something I think about when I think about audience in art making, where I think he said, when you arrive at the studio, all the art world's there, and then you work and they leave, and then all of history is there, and you keep working, and that leaves, and then if you're really lucky, also you leave, which I think is beautiful, and I think it actually sums up well what we're all after as artists, as it relates to audiences, but I think that's very rare.
I guess I have a follow-up to that, where I would also, like a two-parter. One, I would be interested to know, on your side, who you imagine your dream audience to be, but also the idea that, like, if a book's meant to be read, but a diary is only meant to be read by you, or a painting goes out into the world, but maybe a sketchbook always stays inside, when something does enter the world, is there an idea that there are eyes looking on it? And there was a really great exhibition at ICA Boston a couple of years called Dance for Camera. And the idea that when someone turns on a camera or an iPhone, you dance differently than you would without anyone looking. So also with the understanding that, like, these pieces go out into the world and they are seen, these pieces go out into the world and they are read. Right. Is there an element of performance in the pieces?
I mean, I feel like my work is a lot braver and bolder and crasser than I am as a person, and so I feel like not that connected to it I do feel connected to it, but I feel like it has a different job than I have as myself in my body, with my personality, with its shortcomings and inability to kind of hold conversation. Like, I feel like a painting has its own ability to kind of ignore all of that and just exist, and so I feel like I use it in a way to engage in an audience that I otherwise wouldn't be able to, maybe.
I agree. I think my work is much bolder than I am. I'm having occasion to reread it, things that I haven't read for 20 years or 25 years, and reread them, and sometimes I'm really surprised. But I do think I have an audience in mind, though. Often it's quite small, and I imagine that I would be the kind of person who would be very happy in a little village in a valley, and that I would never see anybody new, and every day would be monotonous, and I would really enjoy that. Now, that's not the life I lead exactly, although the places I do have lived, I've turned into villages in a way. But in writing, from the beginning, I sort of imagined a kind of an audience that I knew by name, and I'm always surprised. It's always a feeling of subtle shock when a stranger says they've read something of mine. I think, did they go through my desk? It's like, and different books I've written for kind of different groups of people, but I do have people in mind, like actual people. Marjorie was kind of a Valentine to women who were experimental writers who lived in my community in San Francisco, and Jack was kind of a Valentine to the gay community at that point. So it was pretty specific. My hope, following people both tribal writers and court writers and other people who wrote for small groups is that if you dig in deep enough, then there'll be something for other people that would be generally applicable, that other people would recognize. Like, you know, I don't know, Isaac Bashevis Singer, say. Somebody who's dug into his little community, and then his writing is a joy to read.
Hearing you talk about the specificity of your audience reminds me of something that you said where, and I love this so much and I've thought about it a lot, that you have treated gossip as a form of style, really. That if I'm probably not saying it the right way, but that in a kind of queer vernacular, gossip becomes something formal that becomes part of literature, and I think that that's something I grapple with too, where you know I'm engaging with the history of painting, but like what might make a queer vernacular, and like what might be a visual equivalent of gossip or something like that, which is such a dominant part of relating to queer friends.
Well, gossip really tells you what's inside and what's outside a community. I mean, it really is like sharing the tenets of the community. Oh, that's you.
That was great. I would also think in terms of like openness and audience that, you know, even for an exhibition like you're all sitting in right now, there's a press release, there's a way to kind of read the show, there's an orientation of looking through the space. But ultimately, you leaving the room, you go home, you think about it, you digest it in a different way, and it's your narrative to make out of the exhibition. It's a very rare instance where a piece has not only been written for a piece, but actually sets a still to a moving image in a way. Structurally, I'm interested in how you approached writing the piece, taking elements from it, but also there's a soundtrack that you can't see. There's so many elements that are in the story that are physically not present in the painting.
The poet who's kind of a failure. That's the lyrics, the song lyrics to that
6'2".
Yeah. 6'2".
But again, like just the idea of how did you structure out the story, and then also for you reading the story afterwards, does it make you look at the painting in a different way? Does it become the narrative that you have going into it, or how does that work?
I mean, I'm just flattered that it worked, that you saw so much in it. Really, I don't know. Maybe this relates to the way that we think about our audience in a different way. That I don't really have a nameable audience or too specific of an audience, and so the autobiographical elements in the work I try to suppress, in that I feel like I use my own experience to go somewhere that hopefully might transcend it or become something stranger. And so I feel like that's something that happens in the text too, though. Of course, there are names, there are things like that, but you're talking about a lot of different things. And so it's just using an image of people coming together to talk about what's going on in the world, what's going on. And this was kind of a strange work for me because I try not to paint an iPhone. I hate that I use it so much, and I feel like that's, you know, painting what you see. I'd like to exclude it as much as possible, but this Beckman painting, which depicts this kind of conflict between people, I was thinking about what feels like a conflict in a domestic space, and maybe it is this intrusion like you described as an alien invasion. And I feel like you really understood where I was trying to go with that. There's this kind of like weird beam of light where the cow flies up that is actually your face, you know, which is kind of how it feels to be doom scrolling, you know.
But is that not wanting the iPhone specifically? Is it like a timestamp in the painting, or?
I think it's also kind of negating it out of a sort of like rage towards it.
Fair enough.
Like.
Yeah. And I would have to say, we met on, you know, had a online meeting, and so bits of my piece are just lifted from that, which surely you will recognize.
Yeah.
And and more than just like concrete bits, attitudes, like, for example, about this iPhone in this work, that I could run with. So that's one thing that really structured this piece. Basically, I'm a collagist, so I just roam around my own notes and stitch things together and make a haystack and then try to make it look like something. And then when it does, I stop. And yeah, so it's I wish I could offer a more, I don't know, so something more comprehensive, but really for me it's just stitching things together and piecing things together until it seems to work. It's so vague to say that, but...
Well, it's the exact same way I think you make a painting too. It starts from a larger image that I just start copying, and then there's a bit of some green and gray that I see in a Matisse, and then I'm reading Collette and loving it, so I throw that in there, and I think about, I don't know, the jealousy I'm reading about, so they're not, it's the same kind of wandering through things you're responding to that come together into a finished work.
Yes, yes. I mean, I think maybe I write like a visual artist. I don't see words, I see images, and if I feel there should be an orange slice somewhere along the line, then there it is. I just put it in. So I've always worked like that. I think of my books as kind of spherical, and I just sort of natter away at them at all different points.
But I wonder when that makes sense. I think in a talk that you'd given at ICA Miami, you talked about kind of coming into a mature style. And I'm interested in terms of, obviously that's an evolving space, but I think a certain degree of maturity allows you for a certain flexibility to just move, to maybe not overthink, but there's a certain confidence in the work that allows you to kind of say, I've kind of found where I like to operate from. And I think that's a really interesting position. For both of you as creatives, when did you feel like that was really the moment of turn? When was there kind of a moment where there was a certain kind of freedom in moving into a style that you knew you could just simply operate from and not have to question like before? Like in the educational process or just the life process, when did you feel like you really kind of came into your own?
I had two great teachers at school, Ken Tiza and Joe Smale, who really helped me understand that embarrassing myself was going to be the only way to make my mature work. And so I think that it was not necessarily that I settled into something that I was confident in, but kind of the inverse, which is that I've got to approach things without trying to accomplish anything serious if I'm going to actually be able to do it in the end anyway. And so instead of trying to make like a capital P painting or, I was painting a lot of likenesses of people and worrying about whether or not they really felt like them, and then realizing that I needed to actually just kind of humiliate myself through my work and do something stupid and let the thing that was just going to come out of me. That's really when I felt like I started making my real work, if that makes sense.
Sure. Now I need to answer that question. One answer would be when New Narrative got going in the late 70s and the early 80s. We were sort of discovering what we wanted to do and how to put it together. And in some ways, my life project has been a working out of those ideas. By the same token, I don't think I'm one of those writers that just sort of sits at the computer and have it sheet out of them. I feel like, especially for a big work, I always start at the beginning. It's like I have to reinvent the wheel. I start from a position of zero. I don't know how to write a sentence, and I have to figure it out. I have to figure out how to write a sentence in the first place. So on the one hand, yeah, there's this project, and I have some tools, and on the other hand, I think for especially the novels that I've written, I really had to, as I say, reinvent the wheel. And I didn't start from a place farther along. I had to start from zero.
But I think that also goes into the idea that, the creative process is evolving, and And I like the idea that different lengths of time can also produce different results. I think with an invitation like this, with having a few months to kind of put an idea together, as opposed to, I think I was reading that About Ed took maybe 20 years. Not to remind anyone of that. But just kind of, I would say, what different, I mean, listen, I think poetry, short stories, and the novel are structurally different formats that require different. But is there a similar approach to each of them? Are there questions that you ask going into a work that...
Well, it has to, I mean, I wouldn't have accepted, and I don't accept assignments. I basically put them in the hopper and see if something starts happening. And then I say yes. When I could see, in this case, I could see all the things that we talked about earlier. I could see there was something there that I wanted to articulate. And so really it was just that. How I was going to articulate it was a question, and when I realized I could go back and use these, my dear puppets, Daryl and Trent, and bring them into this situation, and then that was
Have
the
they
moment.
cropped up anywhere before?
Well, there are 3 works
Okay.
so in all now, so twice before.
Okay. And what is it like to see those characters evolve over times in different narratives and different places in your life as well?
Well, I want them to be, they're a special case, because often I write about my friends and people I know, and there are complexities there that you have to be attentive to. And, but Daryl and Trent, I wanted them to be kind of vernacular gay guys, just really an expression of what the gay community is at a certain point. So, yeah, they sort of came out of this kind of abstraction and turned into these people who have this narrative, if that makes sense. And one reason was that I thought about this is because the emotion in this painting and in a lot of Louis's work is not in the face. You don't look to the face to see the emotion. You look to the situation and the position of bodies and so on. And I like the idea that the faces could be rather blank, and the way to read it was not exactly, that all the information was not there, but was in other places, and somehow that reminded me of Daryl and Trent.
And is the idea of, I kind of like the idea of islands and the idea that, outside of a larger group exhibition or a larger compendium of poetry, that these kind of ideas can kind of stand on their own. Normally it is a larger body of work being shown. Normally it is a larger of kind of words coming together to create a different kind of compendium. And I'm interested for you both, not just, I think kind of the word one-off sounds like cheap, but what is this experience of kind of really honing in on kind of one thought or one artwork really mean in a larger practice where we are normally building a kind of a community of ideas?
I think I approach making painting similarly to, I think you said it better. Maybe it's not necessarily embarrassing myself, but starting from zero. That's the way to be your mature self as an artist, to not try to perform something, but really start from the beginning. And I think that every work functions like that for me. And so to do this exhibition of one painting, the work happens like that in the studio, where each painting is a new question that I'm posing to myself, whether it's about color or subject or something like that. And so my hope is that anything I make could exist on its own, because actually it has to. Yeah. And so that felt kind of natural for me, but then the opportunity to engage with a writer I admire was really the most exciting part of the whole thing.
Yeah, that's what I think too. I don't see this as a project about an isolation. This is about getting to know somebody and getting to know their work. So it's a kind of engagement rather than a one-off. And but at some point, and actually probably not that far into the future, I'll do a book of collaborations.
Okay.
And this will actually stand by other work, hopefully, and yeah.
Nice.
So.
I think that's actually a nice moment to open this up. So if anyone has a question, please feel free. Wow. One in the back.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll be able to articulate this quite right, but like I guess for conversation, particularly the first part of it, sort of had me thinking about questions that I've been having about my own work as like a curator, and like I drift off into like queer modernisms, and I guess I sometimes wonder like to what extent it's like nostalgic or like regressive or something. And I think, you know, like certainly you've spoken to this idea of sort of building back these lineages, but I think something I'm also curious about is like beyond sort of representation, also like what surprises you find. And I guess I'm speaking from my own experience of like how often, looking particularly at work like pre-Stonewall, like how often there's sort of these ambiguities or like just weirdnesses in terms of relationships or identity, or you know, things that sort of defy maybe how we from a contemporary vantage think about queerness. And in that way, sort of by looking back, you actually open up like new possibilities of ways to be that sort of surprised me, at least as like a researcher. And I'm just curious in like your engagement with historical kind of references, like if it ever goes like a different direction than maybe what you were anticipating. If that makes sense. Sorry, that was really complicated.
No, I mean, I feel like I don't struggle with insecurity about being overly nostalgic or being regressive, because I look through history to learn about painting. I mean, I feel like that's how you make painting, and that's how painting has always been made. And I feel like, yeah, I'm constantly surprised by the modernity of people from all periods of time. And I feel like we all kind of suffer from the false idea that we're like the most elevated, developed people to have existed, and look where it's gotten us, like that. So, yeah, I mean, I was reading Colette when I was making this work, and that was a reason that I included the cover. I like to kind of surround the figures with their references, also the historical literary ones. And the thing that's most surprising about that book for me is how like the bickering and the kind of posturing and all, it's what we're all doing now and always have done and probably will do. And so for me, looking to history and finding, yeah, it's always surprising that I always recognize myself and everyone in it, which is a beautiful thing and is the only way that I feel like I can move forward.
It also all once was contemporary.
And always will be, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, great artwork functions like that, I think.
Remember when I said I pillage? So yeah, if I'm looking back at some work, I need to see how it fulfills something that I want to say, or even allows me to say something that is latent, that I realize I want to say because of that engagement. So I'm very selfish in a way. It's not that I'm trying to reconstruct an earlier era, but there are always surprises, of course, when you do look back, like, well, I don't know. It's so there's an idea there wasn't like homosexual identity before a certain point. But then when people started, in the Renaissance really, when it was really getting going, when people started burning queer people, one of the advices that the authorities gave is that gay people like to dine well. So there's no homo identity, but there's homo dining. So, yeah, As I said, well, there's always surprises when you go back and read, and especially read contemporary texts.
But I like the idea of when you say pillaging, there's also kind of like something very active in the fact that like you can take what you want and you can leave the rest behind.
Yes, indeed. In Marjorie, the only thing that's accurate is the food. The outfits are very accurate. So if somebody's out of style, it will be out of style for 1380. And the birds, there are lots of birds in the book. And even in Marjorie's visions, like she imagines she's helping give birth to Jesus on presumably December something, late December, in the Holy Land. The birds that would be there in her vision are the accurate birds that would be in that part of the world at that season. And that's it.
Madeline?
What do you think is the role of queer creativity as we move into a really uncertain future, and how do you see it shifting?
Yikes.
Yeah.
Well, at my age, I resist trying to be relevant. So I leave that to you.
I don't know.
That's
I mean,
not a good look.
I mean, I think making work is about making the future. I don't know. It's a big, scary question, and one that I don't think anybody has an answer for. But I feel, maybe now more than ever, that the future isn't this passive thing that just is going to happen to us, and it looks like, I don't know, Elon Musk sending us all to Mars or something like. And the work we make affects the different possibilities, and so that's just something we all have to focus on. And I think that's why my relationship to her history is so important to me, because I don't want to go there. So I want to go there, and I'm going to just keep trying to make that. I don't know, and pick the things that I want to hold on to from our lineages and kind of, I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it's a wonderful answer.
Let's do one more if there is.
Yes.
I think for Louis, you were saying at some point that you try to make things not look like the way they are. And I mean, it's so interesting because I was looking at your flowers in Venice, and they were so specific to the way a flower turns, and but they were so like their own thing. So it was just, I don't know if I have a question, but it's just like the emotion of it is but it was interesting to hear you say that you try to make things look not like what they are.
Well, maybe I mentioned that I'm not so concerned with the autobiographical aspect of the work. Is that maybe what you were remembering?
I thought you said you try to make things not look like reality.
Well, like from when I was in school, maybe that's what, I can't remember what I said exactly. Yeah.
Or what is your relationship to verse and literature?
I mean, I have a pretty wide range of source material, whether it's art history or found photography or photos I take or life drawing. And so the paintings come from a really wide range of sources, but I want them all to live within the same world. And so I think that that's kind of where the unreality comes in, or the way that I misremember things or exaggerate things becomes important, because that's what kind of melds everything together. And I think painting is so much about looking and trying to draw attention to a viewer about how something could be seen in a different way, and flowers, for example, maybe it's the scale or the way they turn or what they're next to, even if it's possible, maybe wouldn't be noticed in that way unless it was isolated in that painting. And so I think it is important for me that most of what occurs in the painting is feasible, but that it's seen in a way that feels ecstatic or extraordinary, and that's what kind of is so exciting to me about painting, that it helps me experience my life that way, that the daily or someone next to me in bed is as exciting as a still life or as an object, that there's kind of this democratic way of looking at the world that feels worth paying a lot of attention to, kind of.
That's lovely. Oh, let's do it.
Just a simple question. Do you sometimes feel like a choreographer, like with the figures, but it's like a static ballet, the way, like your composition, but it's so dependent on the way the limbs are arranged in this sort of beautiful flow, sort of.
Well, that I just copied from Max Beckman, so. But
I mean, in other works, though.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that, like I was talking about, that they come from plausible scenarios, like two figures on a bed. But at the end of the day, a painting has its own demands compositionally, and playing with that is part of the joy of painting. I like dance. I don't know if I would consider myself a choreographer necessarily, but for sure that's probably what interests me about dance, is that it is drawing with the body.
Great. All right, I want to thank you guys for coming tonight. This is amazing, and thank you all.